Welcome to episode 1369 of The Sleeper and the Bust. I'm Justin Mason, joined as always on Sundays by Jason Collette. Jason, are you ready for today?
Nope. Still, it's still very surreal to me. Still extremely surreal. The only thing that brings me pure joy was the story that we saw yesterday that Dan Snyder hates all this. So I'm like, awesome. There's only one thing left to do: win the whole fucking thing. Quoting Major League. I just like if Daniel Snyder hates us, I'd love it even more. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, I am still, it's very surreal to me. Wish my dad was still here if things go well today. But even one of our listeners texted me earlier this week. He goes, God, I started listening to podcasts, and I thought you guys became a football podcast. I'm like, apologies.
I should have submitted that for an FSWA football.
But yes, we hopefully you and I are celebrating later today. But yeah, hey, they've obviously made it a lot farther than we ever thought they would. Yeah. Another one of my good friends, Eagles fan, he said this game reminds him of the Phillies and the Diamondbacks, where the Phillies were the better team. They're supposed to win, and the Diamondbacks went to the World Series. And I was like, I love that analogy. Let's hope that plays out again.
Yeah, I have very, very low expectations for today. Like I've said all along, I'm used to being hurt by my team, so I'm expecting them to lose. But you know what? I thought we were going to lose last week, and we won in fairly convincing fashion. So, hopefully they'll surprise us, and we can be get disappointed in the Super Bowl or something like that. So that'll be kind of what we have to look forward to today, and hopefully moving forward. But we got a lot of baseball to talk about. We got some minor transactions, one major transaction, and then we're going to start breaking down the closer pool. And I figured we'd start with the American League and just kind of go team by team, kind of seeing what we're thinking of the situation, or if there's an established guy already there, are we willing to draft them at his current ADP? So let's start with some of those minor transactions and start with Paul Sewald signing a deal, I believe a 1-year deal with the Guardians. Sewald was a guy that, looked like he was the closer coming into last season, struggled, dealt with some injuries, lost that job in Arizona. I know you aren't the biggest fan of Clase, and we'll talk more about Clase here in a little bit, being the AL closer preview. So would you be investing in a guy like Paul Sewald in deeper formats?
It's intriguing. I mean, on the surf, we'll talk about Clase. It's not that I'm not the biggest fan. I'm not the biggest fan of his current market price, considering what he's trying to do. That's never been done. So to qualify that, but I was yesterday as I was walking around, I was listening to the RotoWire podcast, and Eric Halterman and Todd Zola were talking about this, and Todd made a really good point. Because they were also talking about Jon Gray in the news that he was potentially he was open to closing. And he is like, okay, of these two guys, like Sewald's better, but Jon Gray has more likely to get 10 saves than Paul Sewald. And maybe that's because Todd and Eric both don't see aren't buying the risk that I have outlined about where I'm concerned about what Clase is trying to do. So on paper, if you believe that Clase is going to defy history and do what he's attempting to do this year, then fine. Yeah, Sewald's doesn't move the needle. But if you're in my camp where it's like, okay, what if that possibility happens, then Sewald's got some value. So AL only leagues, this helps. And you could get him cheap and be one of those things where if something does happen to Clase, all of a sudden, boom, there goes Sewald's value. But I do agree with Todd and Eric. I would love to see Jon Gray close. I would love to see that because the stuff in short stints could really play up and just let him go out there and just White Castle everybody and just throw slider after slider and have fun like that. So, too long didn't listen. I like this signing for the Guardians because let's remember, you and I, as we were talking in October, we're just beating the drum about how much Stephen Vogt had worked this bullpen. And they need, I loved Cade Smith last year. But they had a lot of guys throw a lot of games, and that's usually where bullpens start breaking down the following season.
Yeah, and what do we always say? Like when we're looking for a guy who could be next up in a bullpen, managers almost always like to go to a guy who's done it before, and Sewald's a guy who's done it before. So if you're in a deep enough league where you're drafting handcuffs, then a guy like Paul Sewald makes a lot of sense. But as we'll talk about here in a little bit, I don't have as many concerns on Emmanuel Clase as you do. So I probably won't be drafting Sewald in anything outside of an AL only or maybe a draft champions. But I do think he's going to be, a very effective. And those of you who play in holds leagues, Paul Sewald's about to get a bunch of holds. So, if you're playing in saves holds or just a holds league, he's a guy that you can definitely go and get for a fairly affordable price. And if something does happen to Clase, then I think Sewald is definitely next man up. Next minor signing is Jon Berti signs a deal with the Cubs. It is a major league deal. He dealt with a lot of injuries last year and struggled when he was on the field. Seems to be fully healthy and getting a full 1-year deal with the Cubs. Any interest in Jon Berti?
Yes. The thing is, like, of all players, this was the guy that was supposed to do well in the new stolen base environment. He went 41 for 46 under the old rule, the last year of the old rules. And then he has since gone 21 of 28 since. Maybe it's some of the injuries between the Marlins. I thought last year when he got moved to New York that this would be a nice thing. Just injuries never got him on the field. You look, the speed's still there now, but now he's going to Chicago. That didn't run as much last year. I mean, when Craig Counsell was making the trip down I-94 from Milwaukee to Chicago, that they would run because they always ran a lot in Milwaukee. It didn't happen as often. But I'm intrigued with Berti for a few reasons. Like, one, he seems like if Pete Crow Armstrong struggles, as we've talked about on this podcast, if there's some issues, Berti seems to be like the guy that would take advantage. Because you look at that bench right now on Roster Resource, the bench for the Cubs: backup catcher Carson Kelly, Gage Workman, Jon Berti, and Alexander Canario. That is your bench. And Berti plays infield and outfield. He can play multiple spots. And so I see the value in the versatility in NL only leagues, obviously. But the speed is there. We haven't seen it fully play out and what he could potentially do under these new conditions, because he just hasn't been on the field that much. And he may not have as much opportunity right out of the gate with the Cubs. But again, there's still speed. There's still a good core of plate discipline and speed that intrigues me, because if he can get on base and he's healthy, he can. We'll see if he can run this time. But the bat just doesn't offer that much. But he can get on base, and he still has a speed to do damage on the base pass when he decides to run.
Yeah, where I love Jon Berti is in draft champions, right? Or where you're drafting just about everybody that's going to have any sort of use. But Berti's going to be one of these guys that just is eligible everywhere. He's starting the year with third base eligibility in most formats, but he's going to play all over that infield and into that outfield as well. And Brett is making or asking the question: if you draft Berti, are you obligated to draft Matt Shaw? Well, Matt Shaw is going to be going a hell of a lot earlier.
Yeah, I think you flip that around. If you draft Matt Shaw, you're obligated to take Jon Berti.
And I think you are obligated to take Berti after taking Shaw if you're in a draft champions, right? Or maybe in an NL only. But I also want to point out the fact that this Cubs team has dealt with a lot of injuries. We don't even know what the status of Nico Hoerner is going to be coming in to opening day. We'll probably get more information here in a little bit as teams start to report for spring training. But there's a chance Nico Hoerner isn't ready for the start of the season. So that's a spot where at second base where Jon Berti could get playing time. Matt Shaw is going to compete for that third base spot, and I think he will probably get it. But will they let him get 600, plus plate appearances? I don't know. I think Jon Berti is going to have an opportunity to get around 400 plate appearances as long as he's healthy, because that's what he did kind of in his last 2 seasons in Miami before struggling in New York last year. And yeah, we could definitely see him steal 30, 40 bases. I know you said that, the Cubs didn't steal as much as we kind of expected them to do with Counsell work in there, but they were a top 10 team in total stolen bases. So, I think there's an opportunity for Berti to be kind of a sneaky steals guy, and he's super, super cheap right now. So in leagues where that makes sense, I get it. I think most leagues you're going to be like streaming him off the bench, if you're low in stolen bases. But only in draft champions, I would have no problem, drafting a guy like Berti. Next guy on the docket is Tim Anderson, signs a minor league deal with the Angels. This one, I never even saw the report. I was just looking at the transaction since Monday and kind of going, okay, because I felt like there were more transactions this week than there actually were, at least major league transactions. And I just saw Tim Anderson signs with the Angels. Interesting landing spot. Obviously, Anderson struggled or has struggled recently and has not been much of a fantasy factor as of late. But the Angels are a team that gets banged up all the time, and they're not the strongest team to begin with. So any interest in Tim Anderson and maybe like an AL or draft champions?
No, it's just so weird to watch the fall off of him, how he went from hitting 300 every year to like the last 2 years completely just gone. Just watching him try to hit was sad the last couple of years. I mean, you're right though, that they're always do have their issues with injuries. Go back to look at Berti. We were talking about Chicago bench. Well, let's look at the Angels bench. Darno was the second catcher. Kevin Newman, Scott Kingery, and Mickey Moniak. So are Newman and Kingery that much better than what Anderson? No. So there's a chance that Anderson could come to camp, have a decent and get a role stuck on this team. Am I mixing up? Was Zach Neto? Is he still a little dinged up? I remember there was somebody, or maybe I'm thinking Oakland, but somebody's a little dinged up on a California team at a middle infield spot.
So, Neto is coming off of off-season shoulder surgery.
That's what it was. Okay.
And he has been the biggest dropper in ADP. I did an article, I think came out on Friday, covering all the shortstops kind of ADP movement. Neto has dropped almost 100 spots since the start of draft season. And it's because people are afraid. Now, I will say I did see a video of Zach Neto working out. I always take those kind of with a grain of salt, but he looked like he was doing some really big shoulder workouts. So it seems like he could be ready for opening day. But I think right now people are pretty tentative that he's going to actually be ready.
Beefcake. No, with home runs, it's like it's the quality of contact. So since I'm looking at a page over here, since July 16th, 2022, Tim Anderson has one more home run than you and me combined.
Yeah.
That's a lot of playing time that we're looking at how empty that bat has been. So if I just go back and I'm going to go and let me run the game log. I said, July 16th, 2022. So let's go take a look and just see how putrid these actual numbers have been. So since that home run, we are looking at a volume of 821 plate appearances with one home run in a 236, 270, 274. Somebody in an AL only league is going to say $1 Tim Anderson at the end. That somebody will not be me.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think for me, like, I wouldn't be drafting him at all until I see him in spring, right? Like, if we see the old Tim Anderson back, but I think this is like kind of a really good point to kind of think about is when we see guys with really, really bad kind of approaches and, but they kind of make up for it because they've got really fast hands and are able to just make a lot of contact. Like, that should be a warning sign as these players get older. Because, Tim Anderson, like, for almost the entire length of his career was like anywhere from a 35 to 45% O-swing guy, right? Would just swing outside the zone all the time, but he's just made contact, especially inside of the zone because he got really fast hands. And but as you start to age, like, that becomes harder and harder to do. And if you don't have an approach change, then you're gonna have these issues that we've kind of seen kind of come down the hill for a guy like Tim Anderson. And so these are like, guys like Michael Harris, like, as they age, they may not age very gracefully, right? Because they don't have great approaches up at the plate. We saw it with Javi Baez, right? Like all of a sudden, Javi Baez went from a guy who could hit 20 home runs with a decent average and be kind of an all-around player to nothing all of a sudden. I think that's what we're seeing with Tim Anderson. So unless we see something major that has changed with Tim Anderson in spring, I'm probably not drafting him anywhere.
I wish I had a good explanation of why things fell off as rapidly as they did for him. I don't understand it.
I think the bat speed just slowed down. And when you have the approach where he swings at everything and your bat speed finally slows down, you're not able to catch up to things.
I mean, his strikeout rate last year was almost double of what it was just 2 years ago. And yeah, shortstops that play a heavy volume. We know infield and shorts, if you play heavy volume, it ages on you. That's why it's the toughest position on the field. On the field. I'm not like catcher, obviously, duh. But shortstop, it's gonna rush on you. But to see the acceleration into the skills decline from him being 16.3 offensive runs above average to the 23.3 below in just 2 seasons, it's just whoosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, this is why people were a little afraid of him early on in his career, because they're like, oh no, this stuff isn't sustainable. And yeah, I think as the bat speed started to slow down, like, yeah, then you have a problem. All right, the big signing is Jurickson Profar signing a long-term deal with the Braves. I didn't really think about the Braves as even a potential landing spot, but he's going to go out there and play in the outfield. Does this ostensibly end Jared Kelenich's fantasy usefulness, especially once Ronald Acuna Jr. comes back?
Well, smart teams willing to spend money do smart things. Mike Petriello had written an article like 3 days before the signing saying, I don't understand why Profar is still sitting out there. It's like, look under the hood, and this was legit. What he's been able to do. The other thing about Profar that blows my mind, remember, he started playing in Major League Baseball in 2012. 2012 is when he first came up. And so he is, but I love this signing. I would say Kelenic and De La Cruz, because De La Cruz, his contract was one of those weird ones. It wasn't even guaranteed with him, and he's on it. So for me, it's like, that's who I'm more concerned about, because at least, Kelenic has, he can face more righties, but to me, either one of those guys lose their value, especially when Acuna comes back. Looks like he's going to miss the first month, is what they're saying. But I love this for Profar, because it's a great price. He's going to hit high in that lineup for now, and so he should be able to maximize that run. If Austin Riley is back where he needs to be and everything, he's going to be setting the table for the Big Thunder in that lineup. So I love this landing spot for Profar. And let's hope he can continue to build off what he did last year.
Yeah, I mean, I love this signing for Profar. It's a great park, especially with that short porch in right field. And then on top of it, like, yeah, he's just a really, really good contact hitter. I don't know if the power is going to stick around in the way that it did last year. I think he's more of a high teens homers guy than he is, a 20s or mid 20s like he was last year. But I mean, I can't see why he won't be a 18, 19 homer, 10 stolen base guy with like the 280 average that we saw last year. And that is going to be a really good lineup if it stays healthy. Now that's a big if, right? You've got, we know that Acuna is going to miss at least the first part of the season.
Just look back at last year. Look how many guys, look at all the entries they picked up. It don't have to, you don't have to think back. It's like, just look last year.
Yeah. I mean, you got to think they're going to get a little bit better health outcomes, right? Like they had everything go wrong and still managed to make the postseason, right? So I think this is a guy who has a really, really good shot to really outdo his ADP. It'll be interesting to see where his ADP rises after this, because we know it's going to rise from where it's been at, and I'm going to look that up as I speak. In terms of trying to figure out.
I'm sure he's gone up like 2 rounds, because that always, as soon as somebody signs, so it's kind of weird to me. It's just, for the most part, you don't expect these guys to sign someplace that's going to dramatically kill their value. But we see some guys just automatically, he signed somewhere, boom, he's going up.
Unless it's San Francisco, because Willie Adames fell 2 rounds after signing in San Francisco. Yeah. So Profar is currently going at pick 229. That is way too low in my opinion. And even if he jumps up, let's say 50 picks to, I don't know, like what would that be, 180? He'd be going around guys like Alec Baum, Eugenio Suarez, Brandon Nimmo. Like, I feel like that's a perfect spot for a guy like Jurickson Profar.
He hasn't set a new high since this move. I'm looking at the trends piece. Somebody took him as high as 96 back on November 19th. And then he went 110 on January 9th, and he went 112 on the 16th, and he went 115 just after the signing. So he hasn't set a new min pick yet, but you can see the trend line slowly shifting up here over the past few days now that he's actually signed somewhere.
His most recent picks have him at, his most recent pick was 188 earlier today, apparently. And then it looks like 206, 189, 149, 139. So I don't think he's going to go up or settle in around that 139 area, but the 180 something seems like the right kind of spot. And I'm fine with that spot. Like that, I think that is probably about where he should be being drafted. So this course correction we're going to see, I think, will probably put him right where he should be going.
You look at looking at the projections over here now, slightly down in homers. Everything's slightly down, which is what you should be doing when everything was up as it has been last year. But this is still 5-category production. But batting average wise, they're projecting about a 20-point drop. Or even more in some cases. Like Oopsie's got him all the way down to 246 from the 280, but everybody else is pretty much tightly bunched into the 260 range.
Yeah, no, I think you can easily project him for like a 270, and I think a 280, the 280 we saw last year was pretty sustainable. Dude makes a lot of in-zone contact, hits the ball decently hard, makes really, really good swing decisions, doesn't swing outside of the zone. Like, there's a lot to like in Jurickson Profar, and I just think he's obviously more of a compiler, so I think people overlook that kind of profile. But a guy who can impact you that late in batting average, I think has always got value, especially when it doesn't come with a 0 in homers and stolen bases. Like that to me, like I think Profar is probably pretty underrated. All right, let's talk about some AL closing situations. We're just going to start with the AL East and kind of move our way through the divisions. So we'll start with the Baltimore Orioles. Felix Bautista seems to be the guy. He's going to be healthy coming into 2025. Missed last season because of injury. Where are you at on Felix Bautista?
Really curious to see where the rust is with him for missing all that time with this. I was just looking at this bullpen situation this morning, trying to figure out as I was working on a Yainer Cano write-up. And there's obviously a lot of there's a lot of experience in this bullpen with the recent acquisition of Andrew Kittredge. They added Sir Anthony Dominguez. Before the deadline, they had Gregory Soto as well. So they've got different guys that have had the experience. So if Bautista, it's not like they have to like all in on Bautista. If Bautista is struggling a little bit early, they have other options they can potentially use. Is with that year layoff, we know what Bautista was capable of before the injury. It was absolutely disgusting, and we'll see where things are. But I'm a little uncertain just with the layoff. Looking at ADP since the start of January, he's currently 57, and he is as high as 39, which to me, like, I'm going to spend a 3rd-round pick on that guy. Maybe the other closers had already gone off the board, and somebody was like, "This is the guy that I need to have." But the other options are all way down. The marketplace clearly is all in on this. But I would, we've mentioned draft champions. I would be looking to take, if I can use Kittredge. Because even if Kittredge, maybe he gets a few early saves and then moves to holds, vulturing wins, whatnot. But I don't feel that this is a rock solid situation out of the gate. It may be as things go on, but early on, this may be a little bit of an issue for Bautista.
Yeah, it's crazy to me, like how high he's going. Like, I love Felix Bautista, and if he's healthy, I think he's going to be a stud again. But this is a guy who just has not pitched, right? Like, he did not pitch last year coming off of this injury. So, like, I'm pretty skeptical at spending a top 60 pick. That's a top 4-round pick on Felix Bautista, or top 5 round if you're in a 12-teamer, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's a pretty hefty price to pay for a guy that we haven't seen throw since 2023. And, like, He didn't even throw in the minors last year. Like, I'm not going to be spending that pick until I see him in spring training. If I see him in spring training looks good, then hey, maybe I will. But I think if he looks good in spring training, he's going to go up even further. And like the fact that he is starting at this point in draft season at pick 57 is insane to me. And I can't imagine spending that kind of pick, especially when you've got guys like, other guys we're going to talk about today, like Andres Munoz, Jhoan Duran, a guy we're not going to talk about today because in the National League, and Robert Suarez going behind him. Like, I just can't rationalize spending a pick on Bautista ahead of those guys. So at least not yet. That may change, right? He comes in.
There are several people that I like. There are several people that we'll talk about today that I'm like, I'll take. I like this guy quite a bit. This is not one of those situations.
Yeah. Let's move to a weird situation where we're going to Boston. Liam Hendrix signed a 2-year deal last year with the Red Sox, and it was kind of like, hey, we know that you're going to be rehabbing. You're not going to pitch. And then we're just hoping that you're going to be good to go come, 2025. Well, 2025 is here. They also signed Aroldis Chapman. Do you think that these guys are sharing duties? Do you think one of these guys is potentially going to emerge? Is there somebody else on this roster that we should be paying attention to? Where are you at in the Boston situation?
So I laughed when you brought up Boston because looking at the ADP over the past month, Kenley Jansen, who's not even on this roster, is being drafted ahead of anybody we're going to discuss.
Which is interesting because someone brought him up in the Discord last night and was all like, hey, why haven't we heard anything about Kenley Jansen? And there was, a little bit of like, well, there's, he's old. Like, Kenley Jansen's going to find a job somewhere. But, I mean, right now, like, I wouldn't be drafting Kenley Jansen until I know where he's going to be.
Yeah. The crazy thing is we were in the same situation last year. It was about this time last year. Jansen's sitting around. Where are you going to draft him? And then he ended up I remember taking him in a few leagues because I'm like, he's still here. This is so stupid. Like, I'll just take the chance with it. But with me, so back in November when we had XFL, I drafted Liam Hendrix for $3 because I was trying to troll the bargain bin for saves. With that way, I also had Jeff Hoffman, who I had kept. So I had him at $6. So those are my two closers in XFL. And I like how that's worked out. But with Chapman, obviously we know he can still get the strikeouts, but I was just looking at him the other day and we're still talking about a guy whose walk rates the last 4 seasons have been just rounding up 16%, 18%, 15%, 15%. I don't care how many you're striking out. There's just not, a manager can't live with that many walks. In high critical situations. Now, his strikeout rates over those same seasons, 40, 27, 41, 37. So, yeah, he's offsetting some of that damage. But there's also a reason why he hasn't saved more than 15 games since 2021 when the Yankees were finally like, I can't do this anymore. And he lost his job with all that. And then the last 3 years, it's been 9, 6, and 14 with his saves. So, for me, I would rather lean on Hendrix because it's a final year. There's some motivation there for Boston. Final year of the deal for Hendrix, and you want to get something out of that. And if Boston, doesn't compete, then they have something to trade. So to me, it behooves them to stand up Hendrix in that capacity and make sure he can do stuff. But Slayton certainly has the skills to pitch as well. So it's like if you want me to spread it out, I will say like 60, 30, 10 Hendrix, Chapman, Slayton. With things, but honestly, it's a tough situation to figure out because they could say, okay, fine, Kenley Jansen, come on back, and Jansen wants to come back, and then it's all gone with that. But it's definitely one of those open situations I hope settles itself before I get into before we get to labor, which is a month, about 5 weeks away.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get to labor, I would love to have this situation settled. Because some of these other situations are just ugly. And this is one that's got the potential to be nice, but we need to see who's going to have that job.
Yeah. Hendrix is one of those guys where like, I'm interested and I'm willing to take the gamble kind of where he's going because he's going fairly, at a fairly decent spot, 255. Like, I think that's a worthy gamble. The problem is like, if you're relying upon him as like your closer too, and he isn't going to be the guy because he's just not healthy,
Right.
or he's just not the guy that he used to be, like, then you're in some trouble, right? So I feel like if you draft Hendrix, you probably got to go draft Chapman, which is not usually something I want to do. And Chapman, because Chapman's going 325, so it's not like he's free, right? He's, you're still having to spend a top 20 round pick on him. So having to spend, and then like, who knows, like maybe neither of these guys end up being the dude, right? They have Justin Slayton, who's been kind of a late inning guy there. Like I'm probably just staying away from this situation unless one of these guys are my third closer.
Yeah, unless you get pushed to it, then you're like, okay, I got to go that way. I got pushed to it, and that's where I ended up with Hendrix in November, because it's just like this was what was left, and I had a few dollars, and Hoffman was the only guy that I had, and so that's the route I went. I know I need to try to find another situation, and we've got the reserve drafts coming up here in a couple of weeks. So I'll be able to find some relievers there because I have 7 starting pitchers. I just like the starting pitchers more than relievers at that time. But as Brett's saying, injury risk is pretty bad in the pen.
Yeah. All right, moving over to the Yankees. This is the guy we've already talked about, so we don't have to go too deep into it. And that's Devin Williams, because Devin Williams was traded to the Yankees. So we talked about him earlier in the offseason. Are you drafting Devin Williams at his current ADP, which is, as I look it up, pick 45.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with the price. This could be a great season for him. Obviously, as we've talked about at the time of the signing and the risk, if the troubles that he had last year with the lumbar spine, the back issues are behind him, and he can do his thing. It's just the home run risk at Yankee Stadium. Obviously he's pitched in a home run park in Milwaukee and didn't really give up. It seems like he gave up more home runs than he really did. Maybe it's because the last memory we have of him is giving up the home run to Pete Alonso, is the last thing we've seen. So that's my only concern with things. Other than that, I mean, the walk rate is a bit higher than I thought, just peeking over. So he's not Aroldis Chapman, but he's not far behind him either. That said, a 31% strikeout minus walk rate, I can live with that. If he's going to walk double digit to strike out 40-something% of the time, the other guys up there, that's fine, because Chapman's closer to 20, whereas Williams was 30.7% strikeout minus walk. That's elite. Separately, the walk rate obviously isn't, but the strikeout rate is just that good that 30, anything over 30% is just eye popping. And that's where he was last year. So this could be a great season. This is what you're going to have to pay for it. And I don't know if there's any real risk of him losing that. The Yankees always have somebody that steps up out of that bullpen, always have somebody that shows up and gets strikeouts, but the closer role itself seems to be rather stable. And I don't see anybody threatening that job.
Yeah. And I mean, for those who are worried about like the short porch in right field, for Williams, like, yes, he can give up home runs, but at the same time, like the park factors for left-handed hitters are the exact same in Milwaukee as they are in
right.
York. So like, I'm not super worried. Like all of a sudden the home run rate is going to skyrocket over what it's been. I think he is probably the most locked in guy in the American League East, right? And one of the top 2 or 3 in the American League that we're going to talk about today. So like, I have zero concerns about Devin Williams. He's on a great team. He's going to get a lot of saves. I have no problem paying this price. This is going to be definitely one of my targets, as I'm one of those guys who will play for saves.
All right, of all the guys that we have left to talk about, there is one other guy that I would be willing to take higher than Williams. But that's just me, because I like the conditions. And that's just a teaser to make you guys listen. So
I think I know who the guy is, especially considering it is not. Actually,
it's not the next guy. I'll tell you that much.
I know it's not the next guy. I'm guessing it's Mason Miller, but Andres Munoz is one that's sticking out to me as a guy I know you've liked in the past. So we'll get there though. Let's talk about the next guy, and that's on your favorite team. That's the Tampa Bay Rays, Pete Fairbanks. Fairbanks has been a guy who I have kind of stayed away from. The injury history scares the crap out of me. He struggled with some injuries last year, but I think he's the dude as long as he's healthy in Tampa Bay, right?
He's the dude. But it's like the contract situation. I try to look at team history, and like you said, injury history. The next time the next time Fairbanks pitches 46 innings in a season will be the first time. Yeah, that's the scary thing with him. He's had 23 and 25 saves over the past 2 seasons, but he's pitched 45.1 innings in both of those. And something always pops up with him. But when I look at him, and I've tried to wish cast this trade for about 3 months now, but Texas, we'll get to the Texas situation, but Texas wants, they don't want to spend money, but they want to deepen their bullpen. I would love to see Pete Fairbanks traded for Leody Taveras because I like Taveras more than I probably should. And the Rays have other options in this pen. But when you look at the contract situation, Pete Fairbanks, payroll wise, is nothing this year, $3.8 million. Next year, there's a club option, and then he's an unrestricted free agent. And so if you are going to trade a reliever, you don't trade them in their walk year because you get nothing in return for them. So if they're going to make a deal, it's this year that they make the deal. Team is likely not contending for a postseason spot this year when you look at what's on paper, especially all the challenges with their front-loaded schedule and everything that they have going against them this year. So this is the time to trade Fairbanks. So of this situation, I'm not banking on Fairbanks having this job. I've said that I feel that Drew Rasmussen, as much as he wants to be in the rotation, would be an ideal candidate to step in and take over for the Fairbanks in the closer role. And I talked about that on Bubba's podcast, and he agreed with that. I know Edwin Uceda had a great season last year, but often what comes up must come down a little bit. And I still can't explain how Uceda did what he did last year. Mason Montgomery, failed starter, but looked really good in relief, throwing hard as well. So there are other options. Hunter Biggie kind of reminds me of a younger Pete Fairbanks. So there are other options here. I don't see Fairbanks staying with this club. I would put like a 25% chance Fairbanks doesn't break camp with this club and is gone by then.
Okay.
I would say there's like a 75% chance he is gone at the All-Star break. So if you're taking him, understand that I don't know if he has a full-time closer role for the majority of the season, whether it's injury and trade. There's an equal chance one of those two is going to impact his ability to get to 20 saves again.
Yeah, I'm not a big Fairbanks believer. The injuries for me have been way too prevalent. And like I said, he just does not throw a lot of innings, even as a reliever. And I just can't rationalize spending a, top 150 and top 160 pick on a guy like Fairbanks when I don't feel confident he is going to be closing, whether that's because of injury or because of a trade. So I'm probably out on Fairbanks once again. The price isn't totally prohibitive, but I just feel like he's a guy that I tend to stick away from, and I'm kind of staying with that this year. Another guy we've talked about quite a bit this offseason was Jeff Hoffman. He was one of the big kind of free agent closers or relief pitchers out on the market. He's finally signed a deal in Toronto after trying to sign a deal in Baltimore and in Philadelphia, but it was Atlanta. And then medicals got in the way. Where are you at on Hoffman? He's clearly the dude in Toronto and is on a long-term deal, but do those medical issues scare you?
Because I mentioned I have him in XFL, and Hoffman has been somebody who I have admired the last couple of years. I've acquired him in a few leagues, so if you've listened to the show enough, I love Jeff Hoffman. But yeah, I'm scared of this because Hoffman says that the issues were nothing that were they're unique to him. It's kind of like maybe scar tissue. Like he wasn't freaked out, but that's exactly what I would say if I was trying to get a 3-year deal with multi-million. It looked like Atlanta was trying to do like a Reynaldo Lopez type of deal with Hoffman and add him into the rotation. So I'm a little bit scared of this. I would expect it to impact the market price. I almost, getting back to the whole Jon Berti thing, I almost feel like you got to take Chad Green somewhere if you're going to take Hoffman to that. And not that Green's without flaw, but at the same point, I'm not 100%. I love what Hoffman did the last 2 years, but as we know, past success doesn't guarantee future success. And if this goes sideways, it would be unfortunate. But I think back to, and what kind of scares me is just last year, Jordan Romano looked perfect. He had everything was going well for him the last couple of years until it didn't. And then the back gave out on him and just everything, then it fell apart. And so that's what I guess a combination of those two things, the medical of Hoffman, but just what happened last year with Romano as well. Both of those factors are playing in my head. And let's say you're an AL, like a healthy Hoffman easily gets like a 20. If you're in an AL auction, it's easily a $20 guy. But with these bits of information floating around there, the closer you get to 20, you're going to see more. We're not even, I don't feel that we're even going to get to 20 in an AL auction on Jeff Hoffman, but I know it gives me a lot of pause.
Yeah. And I mean, here's the thing, like he is moving up. Like he is currently, if you look at his ADP from January 1st, it's 253. But if you look a little bit closer, kind of since he has been signed, he's been going around pick like 150 to 120. Like and
he went 95 yesterday.
Yeah,
he's in the low 90s already now.
Yeah, there were some drafts yesterday where you said he went 83 in a draft yesterday, and 95 and 123. Like he's moving up because there aren't that many gigs where you can go, hey, this is the dude, right? And he's one of them. It really is going to be price dependent on me. If he's around pick 150, I think I might take the gamble. But if he's pick 80, there's no way I'm taking that gamble. That just there's too much riding on that. And plus, I don't know how good Toronto is going to be, even with all these kind of late additions that they're going for. So I'm very skeptical of drafting Hoffman at the price I think he's going to be in coming next month.
Yeah, one of these years we'll be able to sort pitchers just by relievers on the ADP charts, and it'll be great.
Maybe 1 year.
But I'm looking. So I narrowed it down over the last 2 weeks, and even over the last 2 weeks, it moves Hoffman to 253 and a min pick of 64. And I'm looking to see who's gone behind him. The unemployed Kyle Finnegan, the aforementioned Liam Hendrix.
Yeah, it gets pretty sparse after.
Then I'm like, okay, where do if I'm looking AJ Puck, this is where I'm trying to like troll for saves. It's almost like there's Chapman. And this is what I'm going down the chart looking for things. It's like, okay. I mean, even Kenley Jansen without a job is 190 is going right now over the last 2 weeks, 60 picks before Hoffman is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, for me, like I said, it really just depends on the price. Like, and Aaron in the chat right now saying, I love Hoffman. I'm worried about because Toronto keeps getting linked to more relievers. I'm not worried about the medicals. I think teams were just scared from starting. That might be true, right? Yeah. Baltimore and Atlanta both, I think, we're looking at as a potential starter. But
although it's not, I hear that often, but you can't, relievers having to get up, down, maybe warm up a couple of times. Like there's stress in that too. So they may only work 60 to 70 innings over the course of a season, but there's a lot of stress in having to get up, down, get hot, and working multiple days in a row type of situation. He's handled it well the last 2 years, hasn't shown any signs of any issues, but perhaps if they looked at it and we're like, okay, we want to look at him as a starter and we have concerns and we don't have you try to look at it. If we do look at it from that lens and say, okay, Baltimore was looking at Hoffman as a starter, they really didn't have room in the bullpen for him. And they got Kittredge on a 1 year 10. So, they were willing to kind of go that route, but maybe maybe Baltimore said, okay, Hoffman, we'd like you as a reliever, but we can only go a year or two. If you want, we can go starter. But then Atlanta, their rotation on paper looks their bullpen looks kind of thick as well. So he's like, okay, we don't really need you in our bullpen. We could take another chance. It worked out well with Lopez, but you look at their bullpen, they got Iglesias, they got Johnson, they got Bummer, they already have a lot of swing and miss back there in that bullpen. So maybe Aaron's onto something there.
All right, let's move on to the Central, and we'll start with the team that probably has the least amount of clarity, but also the least amount of value. So I don't know how much we got to spend on the Chicago White Sox, but currently Prelander, Berroa, Justin Anderson are the likely guys who could kind of come in and be their closer. Are there going to be enough wins in Chicago, though, that we even care to take a dart throw here?
Well, Kopech had 9 saves for that club while not even being available for them the full first half of the season until he was traded. So Kopech had 9. Somebody could get to 10, but like if you're asking for 15 plus saves, you're getting greedy, because the more I look at this team, the more I'm scared that they may be even a little worse than they were last year.
I think for sure they're worse than they were last year. Now, will they win fewer games? Probably not. I think last year they were bad and then just also kind of, got some really bad outcomes for them. I'm not going to project them to set the record again for fewest amount of wins. But I don't think they're going to be good. Like, this is at best a 60-win team, and it could get worse as the season goes on if they look to trade guys like Luis Robert or guys like Andrew Vaughn. This is a terrible team. I do think Prelander Berroa is the guy I would take a dart throw on in an AL only for a couple bucks or something like that. But like, that is it. Like, there's not a mixed league outside of maybe a draft champions where I'm taking a shot, because any of these guys, if they do get like 5 or 6 saves before the All-Star break, could easily be traded. Like all the, like you're not going to, there's no way anybody saves 20 games off this fucking roster.
Let's do some math, right? So we said that AL labor is coming up in at the end of February, right? So in AL labor, there's 12 teams, 23-man active, 6-man bench, 29 times 12 is 348. Based off that, no Chicago players being drafted in an AL only league. Based off current ADP, no White Sox player, no pitcher. I'm sorry, no White Sox pitcher. Sorry, no White Sox pitcher. I just realized I had that. No White Sox pitchers even being drafted, and honestly, that's Noah Schultz may be the only guy. Like maybe you throw a reserve round dart on Noah Schultz, but like to me, like I had to look at when I'm doing bold predictions, I got to pick some pitcher, right? And so I went and looked and said I looked at Gus Varland. And Gus Varland has been taken in 3 drafts, so I think I moved the needle because he had been taken once before that. So I'm going to take credit and move the needle on Gus Varland, right? So I looked at it and said, okay, let me look at the current bullpen situation, look at the current options, and I went and looking at skills. So Gus Varland has the best strikeout minus walk rate. Not that it's great, 16.5, but it's the best of all the options in the bullpen. His end zone contact for a pitcher is the second best. Cam Boozer had the lowest at 80. Looking at stuff plus, location plus, pitching plus, Varland was second to Berroa and stuff plus. He was tops in location plus, and he was best in pitching plus. So if I'm just looking at all these numbers, I'm throwing a dart on Gus Varland and using Gus Varland in like maybe my 6th reserve pick, or in the aforementioned XFL situation where I need to try to troll for some saves. Gus Varland would be somebody that I would take a look at, and that if it doesn't work out, I'm cutting him at the first, because we have monthly fab pickups in XFL, and that would be something I go. But looking at these numbers, trying to make the best of a terrible situation, Gus Varland intrigues me only because there is no clear-cut great option here.
I think the only problem with a guy like Gus Varland is they've got him under team control for so long. And this is a team that's going to be cheap and play it cheap. I think Justin Anderson is probably the dude. I think Berroa's got the best stuff there, but Anderson, he's 32. Like, what do they care? In terms of ratcheting up his arbitration. Plus, he's someone they can trade if they can't establish him. So, I hear what you're saying on Varland, but
Varland's also 28. So it's not like he's a kid. He's 28. He's got options, but he's also 28.
We spent way too long talking about the White Sox.
We did, but I had to find one bit of value. Be like, okay, you know what? Here, if something pops, this may pop. But don't draft one of their starting pitchers. Please don't. Garrett Crochet was fun last year until he wasn't. But let's not pretend that if Noah Schultz makes it, they're not going to put a heavy restrictor plate on Noah Schultz too.
All right, here we go. Let's talk about this, because this is probably where our biggest disagreement in terms of guys we're willing to draft, not willing to draft in this pool is, and that is in Cleveland with Emmanuel Clase. You hate Emmanuel Clase. He ran over your dog or something. I don't know what's going on. Why are you? It's not, you don't dislike Clase as from a skills perspective. You dislike him from a historical perspective, and as a person with a history degree. I want to hear this. What is your evidence on disliking Emmanuel Clase?
So I am going to put something on screen for those of you guys watching YouTube, and I'm going to talk through this as we are talking about talking on the podcast. So I'm a guy that likes to go back and look at history. And so something I put on Blue Sky was relief pitchers with 3 consecutive seasons of 40-plus saves and at least 70 games pitched. That has happened twice in the history of the sport. Emmanuel Clase over the past 3 years and Eric Gagne from 2002 to 2004. Now, I think we would all accept the fact that Eric Gagne had a lot of medical help to make it through that, but he did it. All right. So then I was like, okay, who's done it 4 times? Nobody has. 0. Nobody's done it 4 times. They only pitched, the last guy who tried it was Mark Melancon, and he got that final season and pitched 70 games, but he lost his closer job. So with that said, I am not saying that Clase is going to lose his job. But when you look at the history of somebody who's pitched that much, and even earlier in this podcast, we discussed how heavily Cleveland used their bullpen. I have concerns that best case scenario doesn't play out well for Clase this year. That's where I am. And I know I'm probably in the minority on that. I would love to be very wrong about this, but I have learned in my advanced age that history is a great teacher. And the fact that this has never happened before gives me great pause when I see Clase just going like chalk in drafts, and he's going ADP of 34. He is right there early 3rd round. He has gone as high as the middle of the 2nd round as people are doing their build. And to me, that's not going to be me. I'm not paying the price for Clase because of what he's up against.
I get it. And that does give me a little bit of pause. It doesn't give me enough pause not to draft him. I think he is probably the most reliable closer in the game. And I have no issues taking him as number 1 or number 2 closer off the board. He's just been so stable. He's still fairly young. And yes, like, could it all kind of come crashing down? That is the risk of closers, right? We saw it with Edwin Diaz. We've seen it with other closers. Hey, all of a sudden they just can't do it either for a season or for the rest of their career. But I can't predict that. And I understand, like, historically speaking, that nobody has done what he is attempting to do this season. But that's, records and things like that are meant to be broken. And unless I see something in spring that gives me a lot of pause in order to want to waiver from it, I just think he's one of the safest dudes in the pool.
I definitely see it. Obviously we know where the stuff is, but like I said, I'd like to go back and look for comparables, and what he's attempting to do, there isn't a comparable.
All right.
There you go. He can't be first, but again, need comparables, and he doesn't have one.
All right. Right now, the Detroit Tigers, I don't think have a set closer. Beau Brieske, Jason Foley, Tyler Holton. Who is the guy you think is going to emerge, or do you think this is a job that just gets handed back and forth?
I'm leaning more towards the latter, bouncing around. But if you I want to pick Beau Brieske out of this because looking at some of the same things, I did a similar breakdown of the 4 options between Jason Foley, Will Vest, Beau Brieske, and Tyler Holton, using some of those same metrics I mentioned earlier. Brieske had the lowest in-zone contact of the pitchers, so when he has to come in the zone, he was the toughest to hit. He had the best stuff plus. He had actually had the worst location plus of all that, and he was the 3rd best pitching plus. So there were some areas where he has the best stuff of that quartet, but some of the other things don't support him as much. But the eye test from watching him pitch as well, Brieske was the most impressive for me last year, watching him out of that capacity. So price-wise, when you're looking at where things are, it's the way things are pricing out right now. Foley's at $329 over the last month. It's like nobody really knows where to go. Beau Brieske is $490, but Beau Brieske is certainly worth, to me, a reserve pick to see how things play out in the spring, because the conditions are there for him to do something with this job. But I'm not sure that it may just be a closer by committee situation, because nobody is clearly distancing themselves from the rest of the pack.
And Brett here says,
I was just going to say that.
Would the White Sox, Tigers be the perfect teams to sign and flip Kenley? Don't know why they wouldn't. I think this is a great landing spot for Kenley if Kenley wants to pitch there, right? Kenley's at a point in his career where I think there are only certain teams he's even going to consider.
I don't know if he wants cold weather either. Like,
yeah,
I want to go pitch where it's warm.
But like, I think that could be, a landing spot for, maybe a guy like Carlos Estevez, right? Like, like he's been a guy who's been linked to a number of different teams so far. Like, could Carlos Estevez come in and be their closer? But this is a team that, like, hey, if they added a closer, like maybe they're the team that goes and tries to trade for a Ryan Helsley or something like that, because the Cardinals have been one of the teams that have been linked to wanting to trade their current closer. Maybe a Finnegan, right? A Finnegan in Detroit.
Finnegan would be a great spot here too.
Yeah, he wouldn't cost a ton. He's an established dude, and he just would lengthen that bullpen. I think if they enter the season with this trio, I think the guy that I'm going to bet on is probably Jason Foley, just because he was the guy they went to the most last year. But I also think it's a job that will probably just bounce around. Like, it'll be Jason Foley for a few weeks, and then it'll be Brieske for a few weeks, and then it'll be, Tyler Holton, and, and it may not even be for a few weeks at a time, right? It may just be like, hey, today is Jason Foley, tomorrow is Brieske, the day after that's Holton. So I would love to see them go and sign another guy, but I don't know if they're going to do that. I think the holdup for Detroit, though, has been Alex Bregman. I think they're trying to wait to see if they're able to sign Bregman, and if they're not, maybe they make another move in that bullpen. All right, let's talk about Kansas City, where Lucas Erceg seems to be the dude. He's been my most drafted reliever so far this draft season, though I'm not doing nearly as many drafts as I've done in the past. So where are you at on Lucas Erceg? Do you think he is kind of a stable guy in Kansas City?
I like him quite a bit. So this time last year, I'm looking back at the AL West bold prediction. So I said that Lucas Erceg would lead the A's in saves. Now, obviously, I wrote that before Lucas Erceg was traded to Kansas City. And I said this wasn't a slight on Mason Miller. Just was at the time, we didn't even know Mason Miller was going to close. There was still talk about him being in the rotation. And we knew that Erceg had elite velocity, and he was like one skill away. It's like, could he throw strikes? That's what it came down to. Like, if he could throw strikes, something could really take off. And guess what? He threw strikes last year. Kansas City was able to get things, get the most out of him. And then, last year, his walk rate, he went from 14.3% in 23 to 6.3 last year, and didn't give up any of the strikeouts. So he found that one skill away and made the most of it. So for me, yeah, I like Lucas Erceg better than I like the situation in Baltimore, better than I like the situation in Boston, better than I like the situation in Tampa Bay, obviously better in Chicago and Detroit. It's like this Erceg should be at the end of the season, has the potential to be a top 5 American League closer, if not top 3.
Yeah, for me, like, if we're just talking about American League, which we are today, he is probably my favorite guy to draft on this list. I love where he's going in terms of his price so far this draft season. Currently going at pick 112. Like, I think that's like a perfect spot to grab an early number 2 closer or a late number 1 closer. I feel like he is in a great part for him. He's really, really stable. He gets strikeouts. This is a really good team that's going to, I think, continue to get better. I love Lucas Erceg. Like, I think he is, like I said, my favorite target. He's already been the guy I've drafted the most thus far, and I think he will continue to be. Let's move to Minnesota, where Jhoan Duran is the dude. There were some questions heading into last year whether he was going to be used exclusively as a closer, or would he continue to kind of bounce around between being a closer and a fireman. It seems like he's now going to just be the dude in Minnesota. Where are you at on Jhoan Duran?
So often we come across players that are fun to watch, but maybe not fun to own. And Duran fills in that to be like, so earlier we were talking about Fairbanks and the fact that he doesn't stay on the mound. He hasn't pitched more than 45.1 innings. How many more saves do you think Duran has over the last 2 seasons in Fairbanks?
How many more saves than Fairbanks?
Yeah.
He probably doesn't have more.
He has 2 more. So Duran has 50 and Fairbanks has 48 over the past 2 seasons. Duran hasn't really missed time It's just when you look at what scares me about Duran, and this is what my first point on this story is, like, he's amazing to watch. You can go on Pitching Ninja and just the splunker, he's throwing 100-mile-an-hour splitters and everything's fun to watch. But, so was Griffin Jax. Griffin Jax is really good in that. If there's ever a slip up with Duran, and because Rocco Baldelli has options, he could say, okay, I'm bringing in Jax, I'm bringing in this, I'm bringing in that. Duran obviously is fun to watch, but I don't know if there's a path of 30 saves with the mindset that Baldelli takes with the bullpen. And I would just expect kind of like more of the same. And if you're looking for closer one, I don't know if he's being drafted as closer one, but he doesn't produce like closer one. If I want somebody who's going to lead the league in saves, I don't see how that's Duran.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Duran is one of those guys where, like, I don't think he's ever going to lead the league in saves because they use him in so many different types of situations at times.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, he gets a ton of strikeouts. He doesn't really walk guys. He doesn't really give up home runs. Minnesota, I think, is going to be a competitive team. Like, if you're okay with 25 saves, kind of as your, like, max goal, but you're going to get a bunch of strikeouts. Like, Duran's one of those guys that I love when you pair him with just like a horse, right? Like, I don't love Jhoan Duran as my number one closer, but I love him as my number two guy because the strikeouts, man, like, especially if you can pair him like with a guy that you feel pretty confident has a role and is going to get bulk saves, like, Duran's great. But the problem with that is Duran is going really high, right? Mm-hmm. He's going to pick 68 right now. You are rarely taking your second closer at that point. And that becomes the issue. And another one of these guys that are going in the same spot as Duran in Andres Munoz kind of has a similar problem. So maybe if you're like double tapping around that point and you go Jhoan Duran and Robert Suarez, or a Jhoan Duran and I'm trying to find a guy going, I guess Lucas Erceg, right? Like, maybe we're just taking, Duran and then we're jumping on Erceg after that. But I have a really hard time with the build of it in terms of Duran. I think the skills are immaculate and maybe you just figure it out. So I have drafted Duran. I will probably continue to draft him in situations where maybe the last guy of that tier is already gone. And so I'm going, okay, now it's Duran. But I do have some qualms about the lack of volume in terms of the saves.
Yep.
All right. Let's move over to the AL West. The Angels are a bad team. Let's just not sugarcoat that.
I think Joe Sheehan said it. I think if there's a team that was ever aiming to be 74 and 88, it's the Angels.
Yeah. And they're this is not going to be a very good team. I mean, they could surprise, and I think they still have Mike Trout. If Mike Trout is healthy, he's one of the best players in baseball still. But we just can't bank on that. They've got a bunch of other guys who, hey, if healthy, this could be really good, a really good team. But you just can't imagine the Angels are going to stay healthy. The one good thing they do have, though, is Ben Joyce. And I feel like Ben Joyce is an underrated closer in draft season right now. Currently going at pick 181 in Draft Champions since the beginning of the year. I feel like this is kind of, underrated, right? Like, I don't even think I have a better word. Like, why are people sleeping on Ben Joyce, who was really, really good and seems to be the dude in Los Angeles for the Angels?
Maybe it's because everybody feels he's one pitch away from hurting his arm, but
isn't everybody though?
Right. That was kind of where I was going to go. It's like, he ended the season with shoulder issues and they're like, we're not bringing him back. But this is like where Mason Miller was last year. Where Mason Miller was going into draft season. To me, similar electric fastball, similar bad teams. And Ben Joyce could be this year's Mason Miller. If everything's good with him physically. I also just to put it out there, don't forget this team signed Robert Stevenson to a 3-year, $33 million deal. And I know Stevenson had Tommy John surgery in April of 2024. So, but they're going to want to get a return on that investment. So to me, it's like that Robert Stephenson's factoring in somewhere this season because either return on investment, like, hey, we'll trade Robert Stevenson if he shows that he's back, and we know that relievers don't need as much. Relievers can make it back a little quicker from Tommy John surgery. Like my whole standing rule is I don't want to wait to I want to wait 2 years. But with Stevenson and the closing role, I'm a little more intrigued with him. So again, like in a draft championship, if you're still doing those, you want to take a shot on Stevenson very late because I feel at some point this season he's going to be a factor in that bullpen.
Yeah, I think in draft champions or like Tout Wars, and I think Labor too, like it's unlimited IL, right? Like you can just throw a guy on your IL and stash him there.
Well, not as much in Tout anymore. Well, not in AL, not in single league Tout. We can't do that. We have a capacity.
We can in the mixed. So if you have a lot of IL spots in a deeper league, I get it. But I think Stevens is more of a watch list guy, kind of see how he's doing if he comes and throws it all in spring or, as he's going through a rehab assignment in the minor leagues, kind of keep an eye on him because I do think if Stevens is healthy, he could take this role back over. But I think Joyce is the dude. As long as Joyce is healthy for right now, he's entering the season with this job. And unlike a lot of other guys that we've talked about, or we're going to talk about the rest of this episode or the next episode, is there's nobody else, right? Maybe Stevenson comes and, takes that job, halfway through the season or something like that. But like, that's a big if, Stevenson's got to be healthy. And this bullpen is atrocious. Like there is nobody else I am super worried about in terms of taking Ben Joyce's job if Joyce is healthy. He's young. He throws hard. Like I think Ben Joyce is probably the most underrated guy on this list.
That feels the closer we get to draft the peak draft season, the higher that his value is going to be. Because, like I said, the absolutely. Mason Miller comps are just staring us all in the face.
Yeah, I think for sure he's going to go up. And Aaron says he keeps thinking the Angels will sign a closer. I don't think they will. I mean, the Angels do a lot of silly things, but this team needs a lot more than just a closer.
If Kyle Finnegan's price comes down, maybe
that would. I always want to call him Brandon Finnegan for some reason. All right, let's go to Houston. Here's another guy that is in a lockdown kind of position, and that is Josh Hader. Hader has had his ups and his downs, but he is about as locked in as you can get, especially with that contract. Are you taking Josh Hader at his current price, which is pick 44?
Yeah, I am. But this still isn't the guy that I want before everybody else. But so I'm looking at something over on StatHead. Every season since 2009, we have had a reliever save at least 30 games while striking out at least 100 batters. Hader has done that in 2019, 2021, and was the only pitcher who did that last year. Before that, the season before, it was Felix Bautista. So if we're going with injury risk, then Hader's got to get hurt this year right out of the gate, right? And if that happens, don't come back and kill me with that. But But Hader's done this for 3 of the past 5 full seasons. This is where he's at. Yes, their bullpen situation has other options, but not that contract. I mean, Brian Abreu is just as unhittable. And the whole Ryan Pressly thing, by the way, like that situation has got to play itself out. Pressly's not closing again in Houston. Houston's actively trying to trade him, but they gave him a no trade clause. And Ryan Pressly has said, I don't want to go west. I don't want to go east. I want to stay in the central. And so like Ryan Pressly could close for several of these teams that we've discussed and on a 1-year basis with that. But I don't know if somebody wants to pick up that contract, what he's still owed. So Hader's as safe as can be on this situation. And you have to pay the price because you know what you're getting. You're getting the strikeouts and everything else that comes along with it.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we started with the American League was because I wanted to see if we by next week we could get the Pressly situation kind of figured out, right? So
yeah.
But Hader, I think, is one of the locked-in dudes, right? I don't know what the ERA is going to look like. He kind of seems to have struggles with the home run rate every other season. And that leads to an inflated ERA. And if that's the case, and it is every other season, then hey,
It's been amazing. 142, 1.4, 0.5, 1.4, 0.5, 1.5 So it's like Saberhagen metrics tells us that this is going to be an amazing year for this will be an amazing year for Hader.
It should be, by that logic. Obviously, that's not really good logic, but like this is the guy here. This is the guy right here that I would pair with Duran, right? Like if I want to take 2 early closers and I was like, I need a guy who I know I'm going to volume with saves. That's Josh Hader. And then you pair him with the amazing skills and Duran, and all of a sudden, like, hey, yeah, you've got a really, really good start to your bullpen. You're going to have to use 2 massive picks in order to do that. And so I probably won't do that very often. But I think Hader's about as reliable as it comes, at least from a volume saves perspective. All right. Moving on to, I think, a guy I'm pretty sure you like and like a lot, but I'm not 100% sure. That's Andres Munoz, who seems like he's going to be the guy in Seattle, but Seattle sometimes likes to, do different things with their bullpen. Are you confident that this is the year Andres Munoz kind of just becomes an elite closer?
Yes, this is the guy that I love. This is who I was mentioning earlier. You look at things like last year, he was dealing with a bit of a back issue, and you could see, like I looked at the rolling graph, you could see where his strikeout rate, the stuff when the back wasn't fully where it needed to be, how his strikeout rate dropped. But he closed the season on the same heater that he was pitching towards until the back stuff settled in. You look at where ADP, he's going right there where Duran's going. He's going right just in front of Suarez. But when I looked at this earlier, like Clase, Hader, Diaz, Williams, Miller, Helsley, Iglesias were all going in front of Munoz. I look at the Seattle situation, and I feel like this is a perfect situation for if somebody's going to get 40 saves this year, it's somebody like Munoz, because Seattle's offense is still crap on the whole. Individually, they have good parts, but on the whole, it's still crap. And they have great starting pitching, and they're going to be in a lot late close games because of that situation. And so for me, I love Munoz being able to go out there and have that situation. And I don't see any real threat to him behind the situation. Maybe Colin Snyder, but Santos, we don't know where Santos is for health-wise. And Matt Brash is still recovering. Matt Brash had his surgery in the middle of May. So he's not in the puzzle either. And it's not like, Munoz is just coming off the season where he had 22 saves. Strikeout rate has always been there. And for me, this feels like by the end of this season, this is a top 3 closer for me.
Yeah, I
AL, NL, like total. This is a top. He has the potential to be a top 3 overall closer this year.
I could definitely see it. I think he runs into a lot of the same issues as Duran, which is he's not always just the dude. That sometimes they like to throw him into other spots. But like you said, there's nobody else in this bullpen. Like, I'm not a believer that Santos is going to turn things back around. I do like Saucedo, but he's one of their only lefties in this bullpen, and so I think he's going to kind of be that specialist more often than not. This is a team I'm surprised hasn't added to the bullpen. I really thought that they were going to add a bit more to kind of lengthen this bullpen. They really haven't done anything this offseason, which is surprising to me. A team that was 3.5 games out of winning that division, and the Astros have gotten worse, and they haven't done anything to make themselves better. Like it seems just unconscionable they haven't especially made this offense better. So I think I kind of put him in that same bucket as Duran, where I kind of prefer him as an RP2, but you can't really get him as an RP2. So I don't know how much of Munoz I'm going to have. The back issue last year does scare me a little bit because back issues tend to not really go away. They tend to just kind of reoccur randomly. So I've got him behind Duran for me, but I totally see the upside that you're seeing if he's the dude and he's healthy. And I think there's no reason to think he's not the dude. I think for me, my only concerns is will those back issues crop back up?
Yeah, right. I hope they don't, but that's where I'm at. I really like him this year.
All right. So then the last guy on the docket is one of the best guys on the docket. That is Mason Miller. On a per inning basis or per pitch basis, he is the most electric pitcher in all of baseball. much less all of the relievers in baseball. I think the only concern is health, right? Like, as long as Mason Miller is healthy, he's going to be a top 5 closer, right?
Yeah, that's if you want to take the chance and take Jose Leclerc later, only because he's done the job before, then fine.
And they're paying him $10 million for some reason.
Brewster's Millions. They have to. They had to get to a certain number, so they're just throwing money at things to make it work. But yes, you pay Miller and you just lean into the risk, understanding that it could all fall apart with one pitch. But as you said earlier, we're all one pitch away from getting hurt. So it just you let it eat and go from there.
If Miller was a starter, I would not be drafting. There would be no way I could project him to get to 150 innings. I just think he would break down. But as a reliever, I think I'm in. I'm totally in. I think, and I think we saw it last year. He is one of the most electric pitchers in all of baseball, if not the most electric pitcher in all of baseball. And there's no reason to think he's any more injury prone than any other guy as a reliever. Right. I just think that the A's have done a good job of kind of, selling him on the idea of, hey, listen, we want you on the mound and this is the way we can do that. And he looked amazing. So could it all go wrong? Absolutely. But this is why, I do articles and things like that. Podcast segments on closer chaos because it is chaotic. And so I'm going to take the guy with the best skills and in the best role. And I think that is Mason Miller. I have no problem saying that he's my number 2 or 3 closer this year. All right. That's going to wrap us up for this episode.
We got Texas. Oh, we got Texas.
Oh, we got Texas. I missed Texas. All right. Texas, they have Chris Martin. They have Robert Garcia. Like you said, it seems like they want to continue to add, but they don't want to spend the money to do so.
Right.
Where are you at on this Texas situation?
And that's the weird part about it. It's they signed Chris Martin. They made the acquisition for Robert Garcia. And so maybe they go righty-lefty type of situation there with that. Jon Gray has said he's open to closing. That would be fun. But it feels like they're trying to build this from within the situation. And so if they're going to move if Jon Gray moves down, that means they want Kumar Rocker to throw more as a starting pitcher this year. With that, I saw a note earlier. Dane Dunning's been working on things. Apparently he makes his winter home here in Charlotte. So I'm assuming he's been at Tread working on some things as well with that. So we'll have to see where all that goes. I mean, if the market price falls down, the only reason I wanted to really talk about Texas is because remember, last year, they plucked Kirby Yates out of nowhere. Kirby Yates was coming off the season. Yeah, he had a lot of strikeouts, but he had a lot of walks, was giving up home runs, and just wasn't. He had 7 wins and 5 saves, around a very fortunate 3.28 ERA for Atlanta. But he had the closer role, obviously, with San Diego before COVID. And then he goes to Texas and has an amazing year for saves, still walked people, but didn't give up home runs and had amazing ratios. So it's I have to, something clicks in Texas. And if they build something in-house, somebody could get to 30 saves again, because Kirby Yates could do it. Anybody could do it. So, but if this is where they're going to stay, Chris Martin has the most experience, and they don't have Hobie Milner's a very specific lefty reliever. Jacob Latz, I don't even know anything about Jacob Latz. So, and you got Garcia, who had a little bit of the job. So it's Chris Martin, if you make me take what's there right now, but I'm not targeting Chris Martin. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see them put Jon Gray in that role, especially if he's open to it. Usually guys at this point in the career, they don't want to move into a bullpen role. They're forced into it sometimes. But if Gray's actually open to that, he might be the solution right there. A guy they already have under contract, who has struggled to kind of go deep into games consistently and struggle with command and control over the course of a full start. Or from start to start, the bullpen might be the perfect solution for Jon Gray. So that's really interesting to me. And I hadn't heard that prior to you mentioning it during the podcast. So I do think if they do keep Gray in the rotation, then it is probably Chris Martin for right now. And I've liked Chris Martin in the past, so I don't mind taking the gamble, but I also think this is a team that could easily go out and get another piece, right? Like you mentioned, a Kirby Yates type. I also think this could be a team hey, maybe they want to trade for Ryan Helsley or something like that. So I am probably willing to take a dart throw on a guy like Chris Martin, and we're going to see where he's currently going. He's going at pick 632. So going really, that's free. So you take that gamble right there, and then you figure it out in season if it doesn't work.
Right.
All right. That will wrap us up for this episode. Jason, remind everybody to reach on social media and then plug anything you got going on.
So find me at Blue Sky. I did a podcast this week, the Fantasy Six Pack podcast, and that's on YouTube, and you can download it. You can listen to that. So I was on with David Whitcomb from there. So check that out. We talked about AL and NL Central bold predictions, which worked really nicely for me because I just finished writing both those up. I have to finish the NL West predictions here in the next 24 hours, and then that will wrap up the bold prediction series for this year. And now it's just a matter of hoping our dear football team can win again against all odds and get me to something I never thought I'd say again in any recent history. And like, we're going to the Super Bowl. And then it'll be like, then I'm gonna get are you gonna try to go? Oh yeah, sure. I've got like $8,000 laying around. I'm going to New Orleans. No. I've entered a few contests. So if SiriusXM wants to pull my name out of the hat, be like, hey, you've won, you're going. Awesome. But then my dad only made it to one Super Bowl, and he was at the Raiders Redskins game in Super Bowl 18 where the Raiders ran all over. Yeah, my dad went to that game. It's the only Super Bowl
I was conceived after that game. So, yeah. All right. You can find me on all social media platforms. Justin Mason FWFB. I've been doing some TikToks. I've been doing. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Twitter. I'm on YouTube. I'm so close to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. So please, if you're not already subscribing, that's where you can watch these podcasts. I'm going to start putting my TikToks over on YouTube Shorts. I have, I think, Instagram too, but I don't really use it. So, and then I'm writing at Fantasy Pros, and I'm writing over on Fangraphs, obviously, and the Fantasy Benefits podcast will be restarting here hopefully next week. So. Or tomorrow, actually. I gotta talk to Dave and see if he's available to get rolling back into this. Yeah, that's everything I got going on. Hopefully our Commanders can find a way to win today. Otherwise, it'll be the end of football talk.
I want to check something real quick as we look at next weekend, just so everybody's listening. I know this is great because I have to travel next Sunday. I just gotta see what my flight is. Yeah, if we're going to record, I have a 3:15 flight. So if we can record and keep it a nice tight, we can do next Sunday.
All right. We'll figure that out off air. For Jason, myself, thank you for listening. Have fantastic baseball off season.
Thanks, guys.